Nick Sakis with Amplified Marketing Group, one of the co-hosts of this amazing podcast that we've been doing for 18 episodes now. It's been really fantastic. We have an awesome show for you guys today, talking all about 1031 exchanges. So I highly recommend to put your questions in the comments below so we can pick Janet's brain as much as possible to find out how we can utilize this awesome real estate tactic to save some money in the future. So if you guys don't know, we are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. So I monitor all the comments as we go. And we will have a live stream replay at the end. So that being said, all the housekeeping is taken care of. I'd like to introduce you to our hostess with the mostest, your 2020 Women's Council Realtor President, Mrs. Catherine Sakis. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, as always, for co-hosting and being our own personal Women's Council Tampa tech guy. So we're always so appreciative of your help and support. I'd like to say hello, welcome to all of our members, our supporters, strategic partners, and guests. We're thrilled to have you. Welcome back our regulars and those who have not been on before. We hope you find this of value and enjoyable. As always, we like to start with our mission statement, which I normally have out at my fingertips, but I do not. Okay.
I can almost recite it.
I know. I should be able to do for sure, but I'm a little insecure. Okay, we are a network of successful realtors advancing women as business leaders in the industries and communities they serve. So that sums it up. Women's Council has always been the hallmark of education and leadership, leading the way in the real estate industry for women and even men. Our last year's state president was a man. We like to remind you that everyone is a leader. You're a leader in your own homes, your own businesses, certainly many transactions with other agents. You've had to be a leader. So the lessons of leadership are very important. And the networking and camaraderie is very empowering. So that being said, I'd like to welcome our special guest today. Our special guest is Janet Schaum. Janet is one of our national affiliates. Which for those that you don't know is a type of sponsor for Women's Council. And Janet is the Vice President and Regional Sales Executive for Old Republic Exchange Company of Georgia and Florida. She has more than 20 years experience in the title insurance industry. Prior to joining Old Republic Exchange, she worked for 11 years at the parent company, Old Republic Title, and as such was the Assistant Vice President, Litigation and Claims Case Manager. Pretty heavy stuff for the company's corporate legal department. Janet's a graduate of California University at Pennsylvania with a Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Studies and a Master of Science in Law and Public Policy. She also has a paralegal diploma and is a member of many various industry groups. She's an approved instructor through the Georgia Real Estate Commission and the Florida Real Estate Commission and the Florida Department of Financial Services, and frequently lectures on 1031 exchanges. So we couldn't be happier to have her. She's a wealth of information. And let's welcome Janet on board.
Thank you, Catherine.
Welcome.
You.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks for coming. Yeah. Let's get started. 20 years of title.
Yes.
And I see having to deal with the legal departments and claims litigation and on and on. So after all that, what made you specialize in 1031 exchanges?
Well, 1031 exchanges are more fun. Okay, let's just put it bluntly. It's just a lot more. You can do a lot more with the clients as far as helping them and things like that. My job previously was dealing with underwriting claims, that were stemming from foreclosures. And we know that's not fun, dealing with things like that. So I kind of wanted to change. And back in 2016, I said, you know what, let's look at 1031 exchange, and haven't turned back since.
You found your calling.
I did.
Well, 1031, I mean, you hear the word thrown around.
Yes.
Not too many residential realtors have done them, know about them. I know it's more prevalent in the commercial world, but it's certainly a tool for all realtors, residential
Yes.
or commercial. So I kind of wanted to delve into it a little bit on the education side.
Sure.
For those that aren't familiar, what are some basics of the 1031 and what's its purpose?
Okay, so the purpose of the 1031 exchange, and this is why it's good really for any investor, whether it's the small investor or the large investor. Say you're selling a piece of vacant land. You're an investor, it's a vacant piece of land, and you've held on to it, it's appreciated in value over the years, and you want to use the proceeds of the sale of that vacant land to possibly buy 3 condos that you can collect rents on. If you do a 1031 exchange, you're able to defer the capital gains tax on the sale of that initial property. So in one 1031 exchange transaction, if you're the realtor and you're helping that client list that initial piece of vacant land, you're ultimately helping them to become the purchaser of the 3 condos. And that's 4 transactions in one 1031 exchange that you could be involved in. If it's your neighbor that's selling a rental property they've owned for maybe 5 years or so, and they want to maybe move something to the beach, and you're working with them on that, that would be something that you could do a 1031 exchange on. I mean, basically any property that's held for investment in a trade or business, being actively rented for appreciation and value. If you're planning to buy another property, if you do the 1031 exchange, it allows you to fully defer that capital gains tax. So as long as you're buying a property of equal or greater value, the 1031 exchange definitely makes sense.
And just to clarify, disclaimer for those watching, neither Janet nor I are licensed tax advisors. We're
Correct.
just sharing some knowledge that we have. We always advise that you consult your tax advisor. But that being said, when you're talking about rolling over the proceeds of, say, the vacant land to the condos, okay? Again, for clarification purposes, what you're so-called rolling over is the profit, correct?
Actually, whatever the net proceeds are from the
Right.
sale. So the full net proceeds. Yes.
The full net proceeds, which otherwise, had you held them less, it has to be over a year, right? You have to have held it over a year.
Well, the property, and this would be where a tax advisor would come in. There's no mandatory holding requirements under Section 1031. There's nothing that says you have to hold a property for a specified period of time before selling it as part of a 1031 exchange. We suggest 2 years. And then once they do that sale of that property, the proceeds from the sale come to us as the qualified intermediary, and we hold those funds until they're ready to purchase their next replacement property. And they have to do that within 180 days of the sale.
So the advantage to the client, had they not done the 1031 exchange, they would be subject to capital gains tax on that property. Yes. So also to clarify, by doing the 1031, they're not escaping taxes, they're deferring, correct?
And people, yes, and people, make that assumption all the time. Well, I'm avoiding taxes. You're not avoiding, you're just deferring for a later point in time.
Right. And but the beauty of it is, say if you start as a young investor,
yes,
20s, 30s, you can defer forever. There's no limit on the number of times you do it, right?
Yeah, right. And sometimes people actually, those type of investors would be incorporating the 1031 exchange into their estate or tax planning. And, they just do the 1031 exchanges until they pass away. Then the property passes on to their heirs at a stepped up basis. So all that tax is forgiven, and your heirs receive the property at whatever the fair market value is at the time of the owner's death. So they can go ahead and do their own 1031 exchange.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that. But if you did, if you left it in an estate on the stepped up basis, again, not tax advisors, just some food for thought.
Exactly. And that's what when we're consulting, with a client about a 1031 exchange, obviously, we're the expert as far as the 1031 is concerned, but anything that gets into, tax or legal advice, we always, let them know you need to talk to your CPA. Even after talking to us, just make sure that it makes sense. If you already haven't had that conversation, you need to make that conversation be your first priority. Talk to your CPA, talk to a tax attorney, someone like that understands the taxes in your particular situation as well.
Very good. And then, who is not a candidate for 1031?
Someone that's a property flipper. Believe it or not, if it's a short-term investment, remember I was saying earlier, you should hold that property for at least 2 years. That's the suggested holding period. But if it's like a short-term investment, you just acquired that property a month ago, something like that would not qualify for a 1031 exchange. Just because the IRS could look at that, and if you're audited, you could end up having to pay the tax anyway.
And then also,
2 years is the number, basically.
Pardon me?
2 years.
That's our suggestion. Sometimes a CPA might see a year holding is fine, but anything less than that usually isn't seen as a true investment. It's more or less maybe being acquired as inventory.
right,
Yeah.
right. And the other possibility, when you say who is not qualified, if it's your primary residence, it doesn't qualify.
Right. You can't do a
roll
1031
back.
exchange.
And then also there would be unique situations. Say someone owned a property for a long, long time in a prime area, and this $100,000 property appreciated to $1 million, But if they themselves were in a very low tax bracket, it may not be to their advantage either. So that would be like a tax account.
Yeah, it definitely would be a tax question, but capital gains tax are taxed anywhere at 15 to 20%. So
Right.
even 15% on a $500,000 property would be pretty substantial, especially if you've held that property for a long time.
Yeah, agreed. So we hear the expression, you say like kind properties. So what's the definition of that?
So when the 1031 exchange was initially established, believe it or not, more than 100 years ago, it was created for farmers. Farmers started with the 1031 exchange. They were exchanging livestock of the same sex. It evolved into tractors, automobiles, and then ultimately real property. As of January 1st, 2018, personal property exchanges were eliminated from the tax code. So we're strictly talking about exchanges of real property. But that term like kind comes from the initial establishment of the tax code because they didn't want people to think that they could sell a cow and buy a house. Okay. So that's why they said like kind. So what we're looking at, any type of real property qualifies as long as it's used for investment purposes. So you could exchange vacant land for a single family home, a multifamily home for a strip mall, a hotel for a farm.
So it doesn't even have to be income producing to income producing. Like vacant land wouldn't be income producing.
Correct. And the properties don't have to be of the same characteristics. People, it is a confusing term. Like kind sounds like they have to be the exact same, like single family to single family, but that's not the case. Any type of real property.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because it does make you think it would have to be like condo for condo or whatever.
Yeah, nope, not at all.
I didn't know that little factoid about it was first. And it was first for animals, and they were same-sex animals. Why?
Yeah, cow for a cow. Believe it or not.
Funny.
We used to actually do them. We did them. We did personal property exchanges. People in Florida, you have a lot of boat exchanges, for commercial use and things like that. So that kind of hurt those investors, but it is what it is. At least we still have the real property exchanges.
So back to the whole different kind of in-kind properties as a residential agent. Okay, in your residential world, thinking of the investors, and deal with. So what properties in the residential world would apply?
Anything that's a rental, used for a business purpose. A lot of I would say the majority of my investors are small investors, and these are properties that are $200,000 or less, believe it or not. So these are, they could be, they're not really a second home, but they might call them a second home. If it's something that they're, renting, on a regular basis, things like that. But anything that's a small investor, we've had a lot of them. But you could definitely. I'm sorry, my cat is. I have a new kitten, and it's meowing in the background, and it's distracting. So I apologize. But like I said, the majority of our investors are small investors, and maybe they have this little second home that they rent most of the time, but they have real limited personal use that maybe they use it 2 weeks out of the year. And that's a distinction too that I wanted to clarify as well. When it's a true second home and someone's living in the property for 6 months out of the year, something like that would not qualify as investment. Right. It would not qualify for a 1031 exchange. But if you're talking to a client, you're a realtor, and you're talking about the property, what are you using it for? Oh, it's a rental, it's investment property. That's when you want to start that conversation about the 1031 exchange. If at the listing phase, once they're listing a property with you, talk to them. What are you using this property for? Oh, it's investment. Have you considered a 1031 exchange? Because the sooner that you get your client involved in those discussions with a QI, a qualified intermediary like us, and their CPA, the better. Because more often than not, you get people finding out about the 1031 exchange at the closing table or the day before closing. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure that all this is taken care of in plenty of time prior to the actual sale occurring.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you want to start the discussion, and it might even spurt someone on to sell that wasn't doing it because they didn't want to pay the
exactly.
So there's a nice conversation there.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the basic rules? I know you have to identify a property, then you have so long to sell it. So what are the rules on that?
Okay, so basically, once you have the property under contract, the contract, most of the Florida contracts, the as-is contract already has the 1031 language in there. I'm sure you've seen it, Section N, it'll say something about 1031 exchange. In the event the form of contract you have does not contain that 1031 language, you definitely want to get an addendum that we could add to the thing. So both the property being sold and acquired in the 1031 exchange have to have that language in there. So once that property sells, your client will have 45 days from the date of the closing to identify replacement property. And that's 45 calendar days, not business days. So weekends count, holidays count. So 45, the closing date triggers the exchange deadlines, okay? And then once they've identified properties, they have 180 days from the date of the sale to identify replacement property, to acquire the identified property. Michael, can you take the cat? I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
I apologize. This is so, the perils of working from home.
I know. We're all used to it.
Oh my gosh.
You have 45 days to
45 days to identify and 180 days to acquire the identified properties.
So to actually close on the identified property.
To close on the identified properties, correct. And that 45 days, like there's, certain rules of identification. We could get into that too. But it's really important that you have a QI that's paying attention to those deadlines to keep the client in compliance. And then if you submitted an identification notice and say you're on day 40 of the exchange, and you change your mind about what you've identified, you can revoke and replace the ID notice with a new one and change properties. But once you're past the 45-day identification period, it's too late to pick different properties. So you're locked in. You either have to acquire what you've identified or wait for that 180-day exchange period to lapse before we could release the proceeds, and they would have to pay the tax if they failed to buy anything.
Say if for whatever reason, at the end of the 180 days, the property didn't close, do they get to identify another property, or are they done?
Yeah, that's the thing. There's no extensions to those deadlines. So 45 days, that's set in stone. That's by the IRS. There's nothing we can do about that. 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. If they identify no property in 45 days, that money is returned to the customer on the next business day thereafter, and they would have to pay the tax.
So the identification, is that a contract? Like you have to submit this is that what is considered identification, or what is?
No, you don't have to have a property under contract. It just means that you have to identify potential properties that would be acquired in the exchange. And you would just identify in writing. There's a form that's provided, and they would have to specify which rule of identification under the 1031 exchange that they would be identifying under. So but it would be, they would have to identify by address. They can identify by contract if they already have a property picked out, but it's not necessary. They don't have to be under contract.
So
yeah.
If they identify by contract or just say in writing, and let's say it gets kicked back by you guys or whoever's doing the intermediary, that this property doesn't qualify, now we're past 45 days, the whole thing's.
Well, if there was an issue with there really wouldn't be an issue as far as us. We don't qualify a property. If it's real property, it would qualify, period. I mean, there's nothing we would kick back or anything like that. So we would immediately, yes, we've received your ID notice. Yes, we've received your contract, and then do the next steps from there. Get the closing scheduled.
So say on the mechanics of it, the client closes on a property.
Yes.
Then he's going to do the exchange, and he has 45 days. The proceeds from the closing table go right to you, or they get to hold them?
No, it can't. Now, that's the whole part of the exchange. You have to have the QI in place because you can't touch the money. If you touch the money, it's an invalid exchange. So it has to come to the qualified intermediary. And then once the qualified intermediary is holding the funds, they would then issue an account summary to the client that would show what we're holding in the exchange account. They can either use that as proof of funds towards the next property, or if they wanted us to send out a qualified statement that says you have access to this amount of money in case they're still negotiating with a seller. That way the people don't know how much money they actually have, because sometimes when people know it's a part of a 1031 exchange, the sellers, they might try to up the price and things like that because they know about the time constraints. So you have to be careful.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so you go through all that, you identified the property, you closed, and everything's fine. Do you get to cash out refi? Pull your cash?
That could be another issue. If you try to, that's a great question, honestly. And people don't think of that. So sometimes people will ask me that question. As soon as I'm made aware of it, you need to talk to your CPA. If you try to do a cash out refi right after closing, it could trigger an audit. It could jeopardize the exchange. So definitely, it could be seen almost as a tax avoidance thing. I'm not really sure how, but definitely, I don't recommend it at all.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a surefire way to get your cash out scot-free, but it really sounds a lot easier than what it is.
Yeah, it's literally seen as like a tax avoidance thing. So bad idea.
Bad thought process.
Yeah.
Okay, you contact the intermediary, the money goes there.
Yes.
So I guess the question is, at that point, you have to pick an intermediary. Yes. So why Old Republic versus others? Because there are others.
Yeah. Oh, there is. And there's a lot of good qualified intermediaries out there. I'm not going to say they're all bad, but there is a lot of bad too. You want to make sure that the company handling the exchange is experienced, has the financial security and strength to handle the transaction. Old Republic Exchange has been facilitating 1030. We've facilitated hundreds of thousands of exchanges in our more than 30-year history. Okay, we're a subsidiary of Old Republic International, which is a Fortune 500 company. We're listed on the New York Stock Exchange as ORI, and Old Republic International has $19.7 billion in assets. So we definitely have the financial security and strength to handle an exchange, obviously. We also carry a $50 million errors and omissions policy, which is extremely important that your QI carries that, as well as a fidelity bond. We have a fidelity bond which covers acts of dishonesty or fraud. We actually have the highest fidelity bond coverage in the industry at $120 million. So having these things in place place definitely guarantees the security of the exchange. And these are questions that you should ask of any QI. And we also would issue indemnification or a hold harmless agreement that basically indemnifies the customer against loss should something happen due to the fault, something happens in resulting in a failed exchange due to the fault of the QI. So if the qualified intermediary that you're working with doesn't have those things in place, you definitely want to move on to the next one.
So, in other words, when you're closing at your preferred or favorite title company or title company that the seller has chosen, and there's a 1031 exchange, when they say, oh, by the way, I can do that, you're just saying do your research.
Do your research. Yeah. And we can work with any underwriter. So no, even though, obviously Old Republic is our favorite underwriter, for obvious reasons, we can literally work with any underwriter. There are some of the smaller title insurance underwriters that don't have an affiliated 1031 company. We could certainly help with that, but definitely do your research. Don't Google search, go with a trusted referral source. If your CPA has used a qualified intermediary, work with that company. If your attorney recommends a certain qualified intermediary, they've had experience with them, work with them, because like I said, it's just really important to vet those companies that you're working with. And what we do is unregulated. It's not regulated like the title industry is. So literally anybody can do this. And if you don't know what you're doing, it could result in a failed exchange. If you're the realtor referring a client to a certain QI, you want to make sure that it's a reputable QI, because if something happens, who are they going to come back to? They're going to come back to you as the realtor and say, hey, you referred Joe Schmo to me. Why did you do that? They messed up I got to pay taxes now. You know what I'm saying? You have to be careful, because ultimately it does come back to you, even if you've had nothing to do with it. Yeah.
And it's like whoever touched the paper gets part of the lawsuit.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. So they've picked you. You have their money.
Yes.
What do you actually do on the back end? Like, what is your job as the intermediary?
Okay, so we prepare the exchange agreement that's required for the exchange. We will, if you've never worked with a QI before and you're working with us for the first time as the realtor, I would ask that you be copied on those initial emails so you can see what the exchange agreement looks like. You can see the identification forms. You can see what those look like that go to the customer. You can see the closing instructions that go to the title company or closing attorney handling the settlement. There are special instructions that have to go. It's all into play. One of the things for the settlement statement, for it to show as being an exchange, it would have to say something like, as the seller, we would have them put Old Republic Exchange as qualified intermediary for John Smith. And then the net proceeds from the sale have to go to the qualified intermediary. If it's shown on the settlement statement as going to the seller, that's going to cause an issue. That's not done correctly. So you want to make sure that that's done, correctly as well. We also monitor the exchange timelines. We work with the taxpayer on the other side on the purchase, and just make sure that everything, we're looking at vesting issues, anything that could cause a potential risk to the exchange, and evaluating those risks.
So do you get involved with filing any of the paperwork with the IRS, or is that all on the client?
No, that's all on the client. We provide the necessary documents that they'll need. So whenever they go to file their taxes for the tax year, they would have all the information for the exchange. And we keep that information for, I believe, 7 years. So in the event something happens and they lose that information, we still have a record of it.
So if on average, to be more sort of loosely IRS qualified, you should hold it for 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years before selling again as part of another 1031 exchange. And what some people do is they acquire that property initially, using it for investment, and then maybe after 2 years, they want to move into it and make it a primary home. You could certainly do that as well.
And then you wouldn't have to worry about tax. That's interesting too.
Yes.
So you got a single family rental, 1031 exchange it, move up, rent it for 2 years, and then
make it your primary.
Yep. And when you do that, does that take an IRS filing, or is that just a matter of homesteading your property?
It would just a matter of homesteading it. You would just talk to your CPA, and I tell people that all the time, talk to the CPA about the conversion process, but then you won't have to worry about capital gains tax.
But then I guess your your cost basis is stepped up to the time you take ownership,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Gosh, I should have been an accountant. I can
I
figure this
know.
stuff out.
This is,
I love this kind of stuff.
oh,
I
I
know
do
it's like
too.
so egghead goofy, but I love this kind of stuff.
Well, it's awesome. And I tell you what, Catherine, when you have a knowledgeable realtor and they're suggesting things like the 1031 exchange to a client, they will appreciate you for that. And guess what?
Mhm.
They're coming back to you,
Right,
because you're going to be their go-to. You're the one that told them about the 1031 exchange. I have clients that do these on a regular basis. I have repeat clients calling me all the time, you know, uh, doing these 1031 exchanges. And I'm noticing they're talking to the same realtors that referred them to us. So
right.
you kind of have it's a constant thing.
Well, it's really true. People may like to be around you. You may have a good time together.
Hmm.
They may like you as a person. You did a good job selling their house.
Hmm.
But what they like the most is when you save them money,
Exactly.
and
You're correct.
they don't forget that. That's for
They
sure.
they don't, and it's all proof is in the pudding, as they say.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So say the client, okay, we're back to the client's declared, they're back to you. What does a 1031 on average cost? Is it based on purchase price? Is it a flat fee? How does that work?
It's based on the contract sales price of the property being relinquished and the type of exchange, because there are actually 4 different types of exchange that you can do. Your traditional exchange, your less complicated form of exchange, this is where you're selling property first and using the proceeds to buy replacement property. You're looking at anywhere from 750 on a lower end transaction, all the way up to $1,500 on anything over $1 million. And like I said, our fees, are pretty competitive, as far as industry standards, but they're not regulated. So, it's right around the same with the competition, but you could find someone that, we might do it for 750, and then, a bank up the street might do the same thing for 5,000. So kind of, you have to shop around pretty much as far as getting like the best price, but anywhere from 750 to 1,500 on the sale of the relinquished property. And then there's a fee on the back end. It's like 475 for each replacement. That's on your traditional exchange. If you have a simultaneous transaction where you're buying and selling all on the same day, you're looking at like usually a flat fee schedule, because it's really one transaction, then it's not 2 transactions. So it could be a small transaction, 750 flat, no wire fees or anything. That's your whole exchange, includes the sale and purchase, all the way up to $1,500 on like a larger transaction. And then there's something called a reverse exchange, real quickly. The reverse exchange, this is where you're actually purchasing property first. You already have a property under contract, but for some reason, your property either is not listed yet, or you don't have it under contract. So you have to do a reverse exchange and buy first. You're looking at, the fees are much higher because it is a much more complicated form of exchange. Fees are around $7,500 on those and up. And then there's something called an improvement exchange. This is where they call them a build to suite exchange. You're buying new construction. Those generally start higher as well, $7,500 and up. And again, it's a much more complicated form of exchange.
And I would imagine, again, not an accountant, but those fees are probably tax deductible as a business expense to the
Yes,
investor
I'm
as well.
sure. Yes.
So, and it's funny you mentioned that, because my next question I was going to say, what are reverse and improvement exchanges? And
Oh yeah. It's
it's uh,
I
you
could yeah, I could literally teach a class on and I do. So yeah.
well, I think it's always good to have an expert in your pocket,
Yeah.
like you are. But if you just have a little working knowledge of it, as a realtor, you can see how many doors it could open. If
Certainly.
nothing else, just to enter the conversation with an investor sets you apart.
Exactly. It really does. It truly does.
Whether they follow through or not, you've given them like a suggestion
Hmm.
and a resource. And
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't feel comfortable talking about all the details, say, hey, you got to think about a way to tax defer. And I use Old Republic Exchange, and Janet would be happy to talk to you. I'm sure you'd be happy to step in and help the realtor out with some
Certainly,
education with the client, right?
certainly. We can do a three-way call, whatever. We're here to make you guys look like rock stars. Okay, that's my goal.
Well, that's really good to know because until you get comfortable with it, or even when you do, it's always nice to bring in an expert, to show,
Mhm.
because true professionals, you want someone to hire you as a realtor, as a professional. So you better
Exactly.
have your posse of professionals to help them too.
Exactly.
You know, you
Yep.
can't do it all. So here we are, 1031s, doing great. COVID comes around. Did it change anything or is it pretty
Oh,
much
it
business as usual?
Well, okay, so probably right around towards the end, like, obviously you were talking about earlier, we were having a strong year, January, February, great. Here comes March, here comes COVID. Uh, Probably, I would say right around the end of March is when we saw a drastic slowdown. People were canceling transactions, they didn't know what was going to happen, putting things on hold. And so that went on through May. June came back, and things that were on hold, people were just going crazy, selling properties, buying whatever, and I think a lot of that slowdown, you couldn't even get into properties, as a
Right.
realtor, you couldn't even show the property, so we didn't know, there was a lot of unknowns. Now things are coming back, and believe it or not, June and July were the best months I've had in my entire career doing a 1031 exchange. I mean, we
Wow.
were the busiest, we've record breaking busy. And I just think the more people were, as the country was opening back up, people were, and who knows, things could change again and we could slow down again, but we're enjoying the ride while it lasts. Um, when COVID started, there were some, extensions given by the IRS as far as the 45-day identification period and the 180-day exchange period, where they basically pushed those out to you remember the tax filing deadline was pushed out
Yeah.
to July 15th. So
Mhm.
if you had an exchange in process at the beginning of the year, both your ID period or either your ID period or your 180-day exchange period was pushed out as well. But as of right now, they're not doing any type of extensions due to COVID because everything is pretty much open backed up. But who's to say that won't change later? But as of right now, it's business is booming. We're very busy.
Well, that's excellent.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. And then on the COVID end, I'm sure you had to institute different kind of
Yeah.
protocols and all that, like
Yes.
everyone else. In case in point, you're working at home with your cat.
Certainly, yeah. We literally just got a new kitten yesterday,
Oh, how cute.
so yeah, it's a little wild, but yeah, I mean, you have to kind of accommodate for the circumstances. I'm doing all my presentations via Zoom. I'm actually doing one next week on the 18th. It's just it's a non-credit class, but it's enough information to make you dangerous. You have enough knowledge to go back to your clients with, but we do them all the time. If people have clients that want to partake in these classes, it's good for anybody, truly.
Well, I want to remind you, as a national affiliate, to please go to our new Women's Council private group page
Oh, okay.
and ask to join. It's only
Okay.
for members and
Okay.
sponsors, affiliates, and strategic partners. And once you join, you can post anything you're doing in there. So you
Oh,
can put an
nice.
invitation for that webinar. You
Okay.
can put anything um, any kind of advertisement you want for your product. So please make
Awesome.
sure you take
Oh, yeah.
advantage. And it's the one marked private group.
Private group.
Okay.
And here's the thing, my thought is I want you guys to be successful, even if you don't use me as the qualified intermediary, because a lot of times you'll come into the transaction, your seller already has someone picked out. But I want you to know when to recognize red flags. Okay. So that's why I feel education is very important, with the 1031 exchange. And the more the realtor knows about the process, the rules, the better it is for the client.
And speaking of that, as the reverse, I've had a more than one situation over the years where me as the listing agent, here
Hmm.
comes an offer, and the financing is a 1031 exchange.
But like seller financing.
like the buyer is using funds from a 1031 to
Oh
buy the
yeah,
property.
yeah. Yep.
So then, what do you do there? Is it good, bad, indifferent? Is it true? Is it not true?
It doesn't change anything about the transaction.
No, but what I'm saying is a listing agent, I would always call and verify that there was really, the exchange was valid, the timelines were on, you know what I'm saying? Like there's things like
Oh
that,
yeah.
that even if you don't have the buyer, I think you have to have a little bit of knowledge to be able to reassure the seller that it's going to go through. Because just
Oh,
because
that's
they
true
say it's
too.
a 1031 doesn't mean their ducks are in a row.
Exactly. And that's where communication is key for certain.
So I'm sure, I mean, don't you get those calls from listing agents verifying, or am I just,
No. Nope. Nope.
I guess
No.
I'm just a little anal. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's
so,
okay. That's okay.
so all that being said, okay, you had a good summer. We've all had a rocky road.
Hmm.
Nobody has a crystal ball, but ears to the ground and talking to everybody in your industry. Do you have
Yep.
any kind of forecast for the remainder of the year? How do you feel it's going to go?
Things tend to slow down, once you creep into the fall, generally speaking, anyway. And then, the holidays come, Thanksgiving, Christmas, we notice a slowdown. But, as of right now, I'm not feeling that yet. I guess it's kind of like a play by ear thing. And, anytime there's an election year and things happen, that the candidates start talking about eliminating the 1031 exchange. That's always a thing. And I literally, just before we did this live stream, I was sitting in on a webinar being done by the Federation of Exchange Accommodators. That's the industry that I work directly with. And the economist on there was saying, every time they project that the 1031 exchange, could be dissolved, they're always wrong. And, so who knows? I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but it does happen. It does come up. And I think because and this happened to me once when I very first started with exchange, it was an election year. Okay. And that's when, everybody was talking about, oh, the exchanges could go away. So when there's talk like that, people want to hurry up and sell. People want to hurry up and get their exchange in place before the end of the year.
So
So
it can be a good thing. Yeah.
exactly. So my prediction is we're going to see a busier fall and a busier winter as compared to last year, because people were worried that this would go away.
Well, Nick and I have a banner on our business webpage
Yeah,
that says the fall is the new spring.
I think so. I'm,
Because we
I'm
got
thinking.
delayed. And when you think about it, the reason that slowed down in the fall was because in Florida, mid August, the kids go back to school. And then
Yes.
everybody's like, we got to get everything done before the kids go back to school.
Yeah.
Well, there's no school.
There's no school.
No school. So the
Yeah.
people that thought it was too hard to move while the kids were in school, I
Hmm.
think will be happy to move to a bigger house while they're in school in the house.
Oh,
So
certainly.
it's kind of like changed the mindset a little bit. And then
Hmm.
it's so funny, here I'm asking you to predict. And I was just having this conversation this morning with a new listing about doing our first open house.
Hmm.
And the Sunday I had named was not necessarily convenient. And she said, what about a Saturday? And I just started, well, we have found historical Saturdays are just as good, if not better than Sundays, because
Hmm.
blah, 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 blah. And then I caught myself short and I said, just ignore what I just said. And she said, why? I said, everything I'm telling you was based prior to COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, what used to be true here is not necessarily true. It may not be worse. It may be different. You know what
Hmm.
I'm saying? So,
Oh yeah.
um,
Certainly.
who knows? But I don't see everything. And even, when we always historically, November, especially Thanksgiving through
Thanksgiving.
Christmas
Yeah.
and the New Year's, no one really bought and sold unless they had to. The good
Exactly.
news is the buyers that were out there were dead serious. There was no looky
Hmm.
loos.
Hmm.
But if you can't have everybody over your house and it's not much of a holiday, maybe it won't matter this year.
Exactly. And
You
you
know,
know what we're seeing too, Catherine, and this is great news for us here in the Tampa Bay. We're seeing a lot of investors from up north reinvesting in properties in Florida, and I also cover the state of Georgia, although I'm based, in Tampa Bay. But we're seeing a lot of that, like especially the Orlando area, even our Tampa area. You see, inventory is very low right now. I'm
Right.
getting calls all the time for people wanting to buy my house. And I'm like, I'm not selling; it's just my house. So you're going to see a lot more investors from the Northeast. I mean, I'm seeing them now reinvesting into real estate down here.
Yeah, that's happening on the residential
It is
end too,
definitely. Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
I even got a couple calls on listings of people, as they said, trying to get out of Miami
Yes.
because
Oh yeah.
Miami's such a hot spot.
It
And I was
is.
like, you can keep your COVID there, sure,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly. Yep.
Anyway, so all that being said, here we're in this environment. We can't get together. We can't sit there and have lunch like we used to. We
I
can't
know.
visit. So,
Sad.
why do you think it's still important to be part of Women's Council?
Definitely, uh, what obviously the networking, we can all kind of help each other, and I like to be a resource to the realtors. Like I said, my professional goals, basically involve mentoring others. So if I can help you with a client and education and things like that, that's what I'm going to do. I enjoy that. I enjoy working with people and helping people.
And we enjoy having you. And you are our only 1031 expert. So,
Yay! That's
yay,
good.
yay. So, okay, I say lemonade out of lemons. What do you think is the best thing to come out of all this last few months of crazy?
Um, I think it forces people to be to try to reach out more, to stay connected to people, even though it's just a virtual environment. I think that having these type of networking things and just being able to see each other, virtually, I think that's people are reaching out more. I think. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think so too. And I know myself personally, I'm guilty of the hamster on a treadmill. If there's 24 hours in the day, I can find 26 hours worth of stuff to do in it.
Truly, truly,
And,
yeah.
I'm guilty of not taking enough time for myself
Hmm.
and even, others in a non-business like, format. I mean, my family knows I love them, but I don't always have time. So
Exactly.
I find myself like reconnecting. I talked to a good friend the other day. I say good friend that I haven't had a hour conversation with in a year.
Yeah.
Other than hi, how are you? Gotta go. Nice to talk.
Yes.
So like those kind of things.
Picking up the phone versus text. I mean, I just think I don't really like texting. I'm not a texter, but I think it's forcing people to communicate the old fashioned way. Let's pick up the phone. Let's
Right.
things like that.
And I have been anyway more in touch with people that I've been out of touch with other than text or quick email or whatever.
Right, right.
Like getting back to the old kind of conversation of like what's really going on in your life.
Exactly. That's true.
Let's talk.
Hmm.
So that's great. Well, we appreciate so much you being here. You've been a wealth of information. Know that anybody on this call or on the replay can reach out to Janet. Janet, we've been very
Yep.
successful with the replays. We've been getting, I think, about 1,000 views on the replays.
Yep.
Awesome.
You may be hearing from some people. So that being said, how do they get in touch with you, Janet?
They can either reach out to me. You can text me on my cell number or call me on my cell. It's 412 389 5606. If you want to be included like on our email list where you're getting like all of my information on a monthly basis, webinar announcements, things like that. I am active on LinkedIn. I do a lot of things on LinkedIn, but again, they can just reach out to me on my cell. Again, it's 412 389 5606. Even general questions. There's never any type of consultation fees. Some companies do charge those, unfortunately, but if you just want to bounce some ideas or run something by me, I'm certainly available to have those conversations.
And don't forget to go in and join our Facebook page and
I
post your
will.
information there.
I
And
will.
then any upcoming educational stuff you have, that would be great.
Yes, ma'am.
So, wrapping up another segment, it's been wonderful. Thanks. Many thanks again. Many thanks to Nick. Nick, you have anything to add?
I think it was a great topic. It's one of those things that has been around forever that not many people know about. So I think it's awesome to bring this to light and Jeanette's going to be just a powerhouse resource for our whole community. So I think it's awesome, and I appreciate her being here.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Our pleasure. So, for those of you still online, thank you. Those watching by the replay in the future, thank you. And remember to all of our Women's Council members, friends, and supporters, when you see the live stream or anything from Women's Council on your Facebook pages, please like and share, like and share. The more you like and share, the more the word will get out there. When we started this in basically first week of April, we had about 1,100 followers on our Facebook page, and now we're close to 1,800. So people are recognizing Women's Council. They're following us. They're seeing us as a resource, is what we want to be, is a resource for you. And then, of course, on the replays, we've been getting a lot of traction too. So that being said, we promised you in the beginning of the year a value proposition, even though we got a little bump in the road. We hope we're still bringing you a lot of value as a member and future members. Remember, coming up August 20, another pivot into the future. We're going to have elections, but they will be electronic. So you'll be getting electronic ballot, much like you do from Greater Tampa Realtors. And then August 24th to the 26th is the Women's Council convention in Orlando in your living room. Yes, it will be Zoom and it will be free. So all of you who have never been to a convention due to either time constraints or didn't want to have them pay the money or whatever, you can now get all this great information, classes, seminars, meetings, all this great stuff, cutting edge information over Zoom. So that is in your Women's Council newsletter. And then save the date, September 17th. We are going to have a Zoom meeting with the mayor of the city of Tampa, Jane Castor, is going to come visit us. So that being said, wish you a wonderful, busy, profitable week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. And thank you again, Janet and Nick.
Oh, thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye.